of rock with names like Cap-Eternité, Forillon, Saguenay. A surprising land with whales and caribou and quiet villages. Come with us now as John and Janet Foster take us to meet the land, the river, and the people of the St. Lawrence as we go again to the wild country. They come in twos and threes, then they come in dozens, and soon there are hundreds and thousands. They gather here on a marshy foreshore against a background of ancient Quebec City. They are the greater snow goose, more than 140,000 of them, gathering here on the tidal mudflats between Quebec City and Cap Tourmente. This is the entire North American population of greater snow geese, and they fill the skies like a spring storm, an irresistible attraction for wildlife photographers. So it's on boots and warm clothing for a muddy trip out for a closer look. The month is May. The temperature last night, 15 degrees.
The geese are scattered along 25 miles of shoreline in the springtime. They'll stay here 6 or 7 weeks. And although there's considerable hunting in the fall, sections of the tidal marshes and flats are now set aside as sanctuaries, and the geese know it. But of course, they're safe in the springtime. There's no hunting here at all. And they feed without fear up and down the tidal marshes.
The greater snow geese, whose scientific name Hyperborea means from beyond the north wind. At the beginning of the 1900s, hunting pressure had reduced the number of greater snow geese to just 3,000 birds. But with the creation of sanctuaries and international protection under the Migratory Bird Treaty, their numbers have now risen to 140,000.
They gather and they feed, and one day they'll rise up in a turbulent mass and continue their spring migration across Quebec and Labrador and over the mountains of Baffin Island, another 2,000 northern miles. You're reaching out for new angles. You're excited, you're engrossed, when suddenly you remember these are tidal waters.
If you're planning on swimming ashore, Janet, keep the camera above your head.
I thought these were supposed to keep you dry.
That's the nice thing about hip boots, Janet. You get wet right to the hips. Salt water reaches in about as far as Quebec City. And now the river is starting to widen. Here in the Cap Tourmente area, it's about 7 miles across.
Move downriver as the St. Lawrence flows towards the distant Atlantic, and the shoreline changes. The flowers of summer blanket steep hills that fall sharply to the water's edge. And out there, in the widening river mouth, is a strange and wild mixture of currents, salt and fresh, cold and colder. It's a mixture that is just right for whales. And here, just 3 hours' drive east of Quebec City, is one of the world's great spots for whale watching. 7 species of those beautiful and mysterious creatures pasture in these summer waters. And if you ride along with the Montreal Zoological Society, you might see this: finback and minke whales rolling to the surface, drawing breath and blowing.
Watching whales is a little like watching icebergs. You only see the tip. When you see the back of a fin whale, it's hard to realize there's another 75 feet of him out of sight below the surface. Blue whales, the largest mammals on Earth, have also been seen here, and they're about 100 feet long.
Later, they'll return to the whale pastures to photograph the beautiful beluga, the whale that's whiter than a snowdrift. But now, it's down the fast-widening St. Lawrence to a remote region known to Canadians as the North Shore. You look down and remember that half of North America once belonged to France, and that New France began here in the St. Lawrence, in towns like Quebec, Gaspé, Trois-Pistoles, Montjoly, and Rivière-du-Loup, the River of the Wolf. This is Precambrian shield country, where lakes and rivers flow at crazy angles, according to paths carved for them millennia ago by slow-moving, miles-thick glaciers. The waters gather and flow, and suddenly tumble over the edge of the ancient rock, and in a rippling, dancing white curtain, fall to the Gulf.
If you were looking for a spectacular waterfall, it's right here, where the Manitou River drops 250 feet. And that's pure water from one of the wildest and most beautiful rivers in Canada. Manitou is really a typical North Shore river.
A 1,000 years is but the blink of an eye in geological time. And as that great eye slowly blinks, cliffs of solid limestone are carved and shaped by wind and sea, until their skeletons stand on the beach like flower pots in a giant's garden.
These limestone towers were formed by wave action, and they are in fact known as flower pots. They're out on a group of islands, the Mingan Islands, about 100 miles east of Sept-Îles on the North Shore. They're like great toadstools standing in groups.
Local people from Havre-Saint-Pierre often come out here for a weekend picnic or to fish. There are forests and flowers, sandy beaches, fossils, limestone cliffs, and beautifully clear crystal water. A 1926 report on the Mingan Islands also mentioned that the sea gives the atmosphere an invigorating and tonic quality not found inland. All this adds up to a wonderful place for camping.
It's you and the sea and the setting sun, And the feeling is alive within you that life is good, especially when you know that at tomorrow's dawn, there'll be new country to explore, across the Gulf, where the South Shore is beckoning. You're still 500 miles from the open sea, but it feels like an ocean cruise as you ride the sturdy ferry from Godbout to Matan. You tuck your car in down below, then take a stroll around the decks. There's lots of time. The Gulf is a full 30 miles wide here. The trip will take about 2 hours. Then, suddenly, you're on the South Shore. You wonder if the ferry has landed you in another century. This is the famed Gaspé Peninsula, part of French Canada, but yet not part of it. More remote, a land apart. It's a place where the whole family helps weed the kitchen garden, where every farm runs down to the water, and men still work with horses, ridging up potatoes, the time-proven way.
The Gaspé is one of the most attractive places in Canada. The hills climb up and away from the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and the gentle rural scenery does indeed give you a sense of going back in time. If you were raised on a farm, the discovery of a family milking their cows out in an open field might stir a few memories.
If you live in the attractive little town of Matan, and if you're a fisherman, well, you're one of the lucky ones. The Matan River runs between the post office and the town hall, and it's one of the finest public salmon rivers in Quebec. On weekdays, the busiest time is early in the morning, when the men of Matan wade in for a precious hour of fishing before going to work. Up in the hills behind the town are the pine and spruce forests of Matan Provincial Park. That's where the Matan River begins, and that is moose country.
And it's also a good place to find grouse. Matan has a large population. This one is a ruffed grouse. Her family of young were safely tucked away in the bushes. But it was moose we were looking for. We'd heard about an unusual mineral spring deep in the woods. It's called a vasière, and it attracts moose the same way a salt lick attracts cattle.
The moose was so fond of that mineral water that he hardly even looked up. The vasière is so popular among the moose of Matan that they've beaten trails in here from every direction. Actually, we tasted the water. It doesn't taste salty. There must be something in there that attracts them, though.
Was this what she was training for? All those years in Canada's National Ballet?
We shared a common misery with the moose. Not only black flies, but battalions of mosquitoes and deer flies. We kept moving closer and closer. We could hardly believe that a completely wild moose would let us get this close to him. But the attraction of the Vasier waters must have overcome his natural caution.
Of all the members of the deer family, the moose is the biggest and most impressive. Of all the places in all of Canada for finding moose, right here in Matan Park is one of the best. Fishermen around here tell moose stories. One man said he'd peered through the morning mists and seen 15 moose before breakfast. By mid-afternoon, well, you head out for Étang à la Truite, which means trout pond. And you keep your eyes open.
Look, there's one, over there.
Yeah, you're right. Three o'clock in the afternoon is not usually the best time to see moose, yet within an hour we had counted 5. Moose have excellent hearing and the ability to smell you from some distance, but sometimes it just seems as though they must be short-sighted. Just keep looking along that far shore to your right. That's where he disappeared. He's coming out of the bush. Look. He's coming right out in the open.
I see him. Look, the water's getting shallow. Moving more to the right. To the right. Wait, I want to get a picture. Don't move.
You know, I think he's going to go in the water. He's going to walk right across our bow.
The concentration of moose here at L'Étang à la Truite is the highest in Quebec. So, if you ever wanted to photograph moose, this is the place to do it. He's going to swim right across the other side. I'm almost at a film.
The Gaspé Peninsula has another surprise just east of here, where the land climbs to more than 4,000 feet to form the Chic-Choc Mountains.
Once, these ancient hills were sharp, jagged, smoking volcanoes. That was 500 million years ago. Since then, seas have covered them, wind has weathered them, and glaciers, moving like giant sheets of sandpaper, have scoured away their soil. Still, they endure, and on them endures a strange southerly herd of Arctic caribou. You know they're down there somewhere, and you sweep the area in your chopper until you spot them, there, on a mid-July snowpatch. That's the easy part. Now to get back to photograph them. Stan George, a Quebec government biologist, has a tough little 4x4 truck. It'll go through anything, he says. And later admits he once ruined 4 tires in one day on this road.
And that's as far as we got. The four-wheel drive was a little cramped, and hardly the way to go looking for caribou, so we willingly set out on foot. The swarms of black flies were delighted by our change of plan. Stan really wanted us to see the caribou. He's been studying the herd for a long time and takes a very special pride in them being up here in the chic-shocks. Certainly without Stan, we would never have even come close to them.
Up here, the chic-shocks present a subarctic landscape with tiny plants and a jumble of lichen-crusted boulders.
John, look, over there, look.
You're right, it's three of them. Calf, two adults.
It's a real surprise to find caribou in the Gaspé Peninsula, but they've survived up here a long time. This is one of the most southerly herds in all Canada. They were close to extinction here once, but are protected now and seem to be holding their own.
Some of them have never seen a human before. This little calf was momentarily separated from his parents, and he got quite curious. The calf is coming over.
Don't breathe. Don't move.
It's gonna look really nice. Just stay absolutely still. I don't think he knows what we have.
These tough little caribou, high in the Chic-Choc mountains of the Gaspé, are a relic herd, original descendants of the caribou that moved across the Bering Strait to Alaska 10,000 years ago. You feel a sense of old France here, and so you should. There were Frenchmen on this shore 400 years ago. Their descendants are still here, and so are their ringing place names, like Florian, where there is a national park, the next stop on your odyssey. You head now past Rivière au Renard, Anse au Griffon, Cap de Rosiers, and along the gentle shoreline of the Gaspé. Your destination, Florian and its national park. There are marshes here open to the sea, the kind of country where you might catch a glimpse of a great blue heron. Or you might, if you're lucky, see several of these magnificent birds at once, fishing in the rising tide. And now, on into the national park, towards the immense cliffs that rise above the Gulf at the tip of the Gaspé Peninsula.
Forillon is about 450 miles east of Quebec City, and a continuation of that superb Gaspé scenery. A National Park pamphlet describes Forillon as a massive tilted block emerging from the sea. Gaspé actually marks the end of the St. Lawrence River and the start of the Gulf. From the lighthouse across to the north shore is a distance of about 90 miles.
When you stand on these majestic cliffs and look downward and outward, you think of the cosmic forces that shape and mold this earth. You think of the millions of years of wind and weather and sun and storm that slowly, relentlessly, constantly shift and carve and change the face of our world. And you know that for all man's dreams and illusions, nature, in the end, is master of all things.
The park is on a finger of land jutting out from the Gaspé Peninsula. The cliffs here rise to over 600 feet and lean outwards over the sea. The double-crested cormorant has been adopted as a symbol of the park. And like cormorants we've seen in other parts of Canada, it nests here high up on the rock face, on those terrifyingly narrow little ledges.
Old roads leading into the park interior are being converted now into hiking trails. And there's a footpath leading down to a wild and rocky little beach that's totally enclosed by those overhanging cliffs. You'll see gannets at Forillon. They're fishing out here. And it's a reminder that you're only about 20 miles from that famous Bonaventure Island where they nest.
And now, these old sedimentary cliffs tower above you. This is where Cap Gaspé runs into the sea. The shoreline is indented with cobblestone beaches and rocky coves. But you should remember to keep an eye on the tide if you explore here. You could get stranded for 6 or 7 hours.
These are eider ducks, a couple of families grouping together after leaving the nesting grounds. And if you see a pair of large, solemn eyes and a nose covered in whiskers out there in the waves, you're probably being examined by a harbor seal.
There's something about climbing a cliff that fills you with a sense of exhilaration. Blue sky above, blue water below, and the clean, clear air has a special lift to it. You feel as though maybe you own the world.
Then we discovered whose territory this really was. It belonged to some little red-mouthed black guillemots. They're stubby little black and white birds who speak with a shrill whistle.
This is one national park where both man and wildlife have long had a special relationship with the sea. For man, it's been a precarious relationship, huddling in tiny coves between the cliffs and the icy waters, finding life and death out there in the Gulf. Today, when you come to Forillon, you may feel echoes of that life, for men still go to the sea here and bring their harvest home.
The wharf will always be in the park. It serves to emphasize the park's theme, harmony between man, land, and the sea. There's plenty of life in Gaspé waters: cod, Atlantic salmon, herring, mackerel, and 12 species of whales.
Moving inland now, to walk the trails and search for deer, before traveling south to one of the most famous islands in Quebec. This part of Forillon National Park was farmland once. Daisies grow where once there were fields of corn, and young foxes tumble and play in the long grass. And if you step softly just before sunrise, you may see white-tailed deer slipping out of the forest. You settle down for a tasty feed of wild berries, even risking a quick flip open of that all-important black fly net. In fact, you're in someone else's territory. Park planners want to make these meadows easier for people to reach, so they're opening a trail, not for cars, for bicycles. You've now reached the far tip of the Gaspé Peninsula, and you're skimming past world-famed Percé Rock. It lies there like a giant stone whale, watching you with its one great eye. But you can think only of nearby Bonaventure Island, one of the world's greatest seabird nesting sites.
The cliffs of Bonaventure are swarming with birds during the nesting season. Murres, cormorants, kittiwakes, razorbill auks, and more than 25,000 pairs of gannets. From a small boat, you can look up into the colonies, and tour boats are extremely active around Bonaventure.
Jacques Cartier was one of the first white men to see the bird colonies of the St. Lawrence. In 1534, he wrote that these islands were as full of birds as any meadow is of grass.
This gannet was injured. We saw it tumble from a high ledge onto some rocks and into the water. But we left it alone, hoping that it would recover.
A symphony in slow motion, floating on the rising currents of air and dropping down into that one tiny space allowed for each pair. Graceful travelers of the wind and the sea.
The gannets were almost exterminated in the 19th century. They were clubbed to death and used as fish bait, and their eggs were taken for food. At the beginning of this century, the slaughter increased, with boatloads of gunners shooting into the colony and taking pot shots at nesting birds, all for no apparent reason. Finally, in 1918, Bonaventure Island was declared a sanctuary, and the bird population gradually began to increase again. More recently, the gannets have been threatened by oil slicks and DDT in their fish diet.
Today, the Canadian Wildlife Service keeps an eye on the gannets of Bonaventure, and we were cautioned by a biologist, Phil Taylor, not to approach too closely to nesting birds, for disturbances during incubation can be critical to a bird that lays only one egg. And wildlife photographers who are careless can create a serious disturbance. Several behavior patterns are repeated continually, and one thing they like to do is to steal nesting material from each other. Arriving at the nest, they're greeted by their mate with an elaborate fencing ceremony. Sometimes a neighbor will express an opinion about the size of his territory.
We weren't quite sure what was going on here. Mother appeared to be trying to add the feather to the nest, but Junior had his own ideas about nest construction.
The gannets of Bonaventure Island remain as one of the great spectacles of Quebec's southeast shore.
Back upriver now, and across to the North Shore, to the whale pastures, that part of the great St. Lawrence that is one of the best places in the world for whale watching. At the mouth of the Saguenay, you get on a little blue research vessel and steam out to that part of the water where you know the whales will be. You're here to learn whether a beluga can be wired for sound, from a man who has studied whales in oceans all over the world, marine biologist David Gaskin.
How does that go on, Dave?
Well, this whole rig is fitted with a harness around the beluga. And you'll notice here that there's a space for dorsal fin because this was developed in California specifically for the porpoises that are taken along with the tuna.
Yeah.
this is a problem that they've had there. But of course the beluga doesn't have a dorsal fin, so we've had to modify this rig and put the beluga in a kind of vinyl corset. And we have a brass and steel grommet system, corrosible system here, which will release after a certain period of time.
Literally will rot right off it.
It'll rot right off the animal, yes. It should take hopefully about 2 weeks, but it's almost impossible to estimate it accurately. The antenna will give you a signal only when it's in air, so that while the animal's under the water and the antenna's submerged, the signal stops. And using this, of course, we can directly calculate the dive times, and we can use the audio display to give us some idea of distance. And this requires experience. It won't give you, there's no way you can take a direct read off or anything like this.
What is the whole purpose of this, Gary?
So that we can follow its movements on a daily basis to help us define daily migration routes and subpopulation structures. It's very difficult to do this without having a visual or electronic tagging system. We hope it'll be a useful tool.
Gary, the belugas, are they also on the decline along with the other species that we hear about?
Well, they're not declining since they're not being hunted, but they're living in an environment which is very marginal since they are an Arctic animal, and this is considerably south of the Arctic, and it's very touch and go whether they'll survive.
And there they are. Of all the whales that swim in Canada's seas and tidal rivers, there's something special about the beluga. Ah, yes, people will say, the white whale. They don't swim. They materialize and vanish and appear again. They seem to be flowing through the water with a mysterious liquidity. The currents swirl, and the white whales are in harmony with their world. Out in the summer fog that hangs above the mixture of currents at the entrance to the Saguenay is a rocky point of land called Lark Reef. And here you row ashore, for this shallow water is a favorite feeding ground of the beluga, and if you're lucky, they may swim by just a few feet from your camera.
Lark Reef almost disappears when the tide is in, but that part which is always above water is densely populated with herring gulls, blackback gulls, and eider ducks, and all of them are nesting here.
The black-backed and herring gulls of tiny Lark Point are angrily protesting your presence. You're watching, waiting for another glimpse of the white whales. They're out there, somewhere beneath those waves, you hope. A deep-sea freighter here in the wild country? Why not? You're smack in the middle of one of the busiest shipping routes on the continent.
We spent 2 hours photographing the birds and keeping our fingers crossed that the whales would appear. Then there was a gleam of white out in the bay.
We got whales. They're coming out of the Saguenay, right in the bay.
Yeah.
Sure, I couldn't see how many. See?
There's two. No,
Okay, I'll look for you.
Oh, they're beautiful.
Can you see where they're coming from?
Yes. I think they're going to come right round the point. With any luck, they'll come right by us.
I think they can stay down about 15 minutes if they have to, but this water's so shallow here that I guess they're just working right near shore. And they can't dive too deep. Nice, 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 nice. Full frame.
One of these whales has a huge piece missing from his back. Now watch carefully on the right, and you'll see him surface. Right there. He may have been hit by a ship's propeller or perhaps attacked by a killer whale out in the ocean.
Those guys can really move.
They rise and dip and rise again, thriving in the Arctic-like currents that flow out of the nearby Saguenay Fjord. That glacial chasm is one of the great natural wonders of the continent, and tomorrow you'll explore it from the air. They call Quebec La Belle Province, and the land is fair indeed. Rolling hills of Precambrian rock, thick green forests sweeping down to the water's edge. And like a large glittering jewel in a primeval setting, the steep-sided Saguenay Fjord. There are few sights like this in all of North America. There's a remoteness here in the Saguenay, where more than 600 million years of history is written in the rocks, and the hills have names like Cap Trinité, Cap Eternité. Saguenay, flowing down into the living gulf of one of the world's mightiest rivers, flowing through the land of the great St. Lawrence.